So kind of going off of what you were saying about representation, well, that can mean a lot of different things, and the three of us, we're all mixed race, biracial. How do you go about representing yourself with that element of your identity? And that's something that I think I've been very interested in, because I know there are next to no specifically mixed race roles out there at the moment.
Yeah.
I'm writing an essay on it, actually.
Well,
is that what your dissertation's on?
Well, this sort of dissertation, yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
I would like to step in here actually, because
Yeah.
there are actually some very specifically mixed race roles, but there's one small problem with them, is that they tend to translate for shows that were on for a certain amount of time. So you wouldn't see them in the West End and you wouldn't see them on Broadway, simply because they aren't in the shows that we call the long-running core shows. Now, something like Hamilton, which is a bit more colourblind in terms of how it casts, will have those openings. But the thing is, those sorts of roles could go to anyone. They aren't specifically for someone who is mixed race. But plays such as God's Property by Erinze Kene, Octroon, and Half-Breed all do have mixed race roles in them. But
Half-Breed is a brilliant play.
It is a fantastic
Do you
play.
have a copy of it?
I
do
actually
not.
do.
You do, yeah.
I do, yeah.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
technically, Small Island does as well, but not quite in the same way. But because of that, it's one of those things where there are roles which are mixed race, but they will only exist in terms of work, and plays and shows that have those roles written into them will be around, but those ones aren't the ones that will just run and run and run. If
Yeah,
that
they'll
makes
be
sense.
like short run things.
Exactly. Which in some respects actually means that mixed race actors have this thing where they will probably play a broader range of roles than someone who isn't, if that makes sense.
This is what I was going to get onto. So from my experience and talking to other people of colour in the industry who I've worked with, and also just like I'm in a few Facebook groups for creatives of colour as well. I know Facebook's like a dying social media platform, and you know, I understand why, because if I wasn't on it for specific reasons, I would not be on it anymore.
Yeah.
But there are
might outlive Facebook. That's something which is kind of weird.
I know. But there are some useful Facebook groups for actors on there and creatives on there. You know, specific groups for people of colour, or specific groups for the queer community and things like that. The smaller niche ones, they are useful as a support group and a way to like network and things. Tangent. But there tends to be kind of two ways casting can go. There's like specific, we're looking for this specific thing, and that tends to be shows where the ethnicity is a very concrete thing. So, for example, for musicals, you're looking like things like Dreamgirls. You can't have a white or a East Asian or a South Asian Effie, because that is about a black girl group. It's very specific in that. Or some of the plays you mentioned, like God's Property and Half-Breed. Also bearing in mind, obviously, we're all talking about Black Caribbean mixed race heritage, but also mixed race can be any mix. So there's that as well. So there's that avenue, which is like very specific. We're looking for this specific thing. Actually, there's kind of three. The kind of middle avenue, I will say for now, is like true colorblind casting. So something like Hamilton, where it's like all of the roles, any ethnicity. I've never been called in for Hamilton, so I don't know if it's actually all the roles, any ethnicity, but from having seen it and seeing what the casting looks like, it's any ethnicity, and it's just like whoever can sing the part or rap the part or dance the part. The third avenue is, and I've noticed this more and more as I've become more aware of it, is like what I'd call the token casting. So this is where, and the way that you can notice it, and I just want to add this with the caveat, is I don't think this is I mean, we can have a discussion about whether this is inherently bad, but I think this is another video. I don't think necessarily it's inherently bad. I think it's just the phase we are in at the moment with increasing racial diversity. But it tends to... Can I finish my point?
Yeah.
Sorry. I know you want to say something.
You got lots to say.
I have so much, but what I actually have to say is quite pointed though. Like,
Okay.
but in a
Can I finish my point?
I'll finish it.
But the way I've seen it manifest in casting calls and also in some of the jobs I've done is it tends to be the smallest named part specifically in a show. It tends to be the last part or one of the last parts that's being cast, and on the casting breakdown with appearance it will list every single ethnicity that is not Caucasian. So you'll get a list of South Asian, East Asian, Black African, Black Caribbean, mixed race, and then it will go through Korean, Chinese, Japanese, Indian, Pakistani, Nigerian. I don't know if actually Spotlight lets you break down by all of the African countries, but
It does
like
by some of them.
Jamaican, Bayesian,
Egyptian.
sometimes Egyptian. Oh yeah, Middle Eastern will be on there as well. Either when the cast is announced or if you get the role when you go into the rehearsal room, or just Google everyone in the casting announcement, you will see that everyone is white apart from you, maybe your understudy if there's understudies. So those are kind of like the three avenues. And then within that, you've got the biases of whoever's on the casting team. So even if we're going with like the first avenue of you have very specific, like we're looking for someone who's specifically Nigerian, for example. I'm using this because this was a story that I heard from someone. I won't say what they were being, I don't think they told me what they were being cast for, but this person was of Nigerian descent, Black British Nigerian ancestry, got called in because they were looking for a Nigerian woman, and was told by the white panel that she just didn't look Nigerian. And when she asked, what do you mean? Do you mean like
That happens quite a lot, by the way.
Yeah.
Happened to me in a way.
But when she was like, do you mean a specific tribal area or a specific city? They were like, no, we just need someone more Nigerian. And she's like, but I am.
But then you could
So-
raise the question, is this going, but have any of you been to Nigeria? Do you even know where Nigeria is on a map?
This is the thing.
What's the currency they use in Nigeria, boy? White man?
What
Do you
language
know?
is spoken there?
See, this is the thing. So not only do you have to contend with the actual casting breakdowns, whatever they may be, but also, you know, you might go into the room with an ignorant panel, and the panel shouldn't be ignorant, but sometimes they are. And even I've not. Can I?
Sometimes. Sometimes.
As an actor, you know, you get a casting breakdown. You're like, I'm right for the part. Yeah, from the breakdown, I can tell it's at number 3. Like, I'm probably going to be the token casting, but hey, it's a job. We'll see what it's like in the room. You have no control over how ignorant or not the panel is. It might be a panel who's like seriously considered every avenue of this casting choice and is like, look, we know we need a person of colour, and, you know, we've cast all the other parts, so this is the one part we have left, but we've thought about how this impacts the story. We've looked at the script and we know that it doesn't do anything icky. And, you know, representation is important, and we want to make sure that we are representing the Britain of today. You might get a panel who is like, yeah, whatever. A panel who feels like we have to do this now, so let's just do it and not think about the implications. And that can be just in the casting process. That can even go all the way back into the writing process as well. As a performer, what is important for you, it's kind of like double think in 1984. You kind of have to hold both in your brain of knowing, like, I can play so many facets because as a human we contain multitudes, and being a black person or being a mixed race person doesn't mean one thing, right? It doesn't mean acting in one way or dressing in one way. It, like, I can do more than sing this kind of role or dance this kind of style. But knowing that the industry or certain parts of the industry might see you that way or not see you that way. They're going to make a judgment based on what you look like. And this is one of the things where I'm so grateful to my agent in the types of jobs that they've managed to help me get in the room for, is that by and large, most of the roles that I've done have been, you know, where people have genuinely wanted to have diverse casting. And so, you know, I've done main roles for characters that very easily they could have been like default white characters, but the creative teams are like, no, we want diversity, so that's what we're going to do. Whether that's diversity through colorblindness or diversity through, it's not even thinking outside the box because you have interracial families, but like not assuming that, okay, a mixed race kid has to have a black parent or a black person has to have a black parent. Like adoption exists, like foster families, like there are so many different family dynamics. Like you can, you know, it's not a crazy world if something's set in modern day to like think that, oh, you know, that can happen. There's so many different ways family units can be made up. I'm lucky that I've had quite a few of those jobs in my career to date, and so I haven't been restricted either by just the opportunities that have come my way, or an agent having a narrow mindset of being like, well, you're mixed race, so you have to go for the black mixed race roles only. That doesn't mean that I'm not going up for those roles as well necessarily, but you know, they're not pigeonholing me in that way. And I think you've got to not do that to yourself as well. If it says appearance any, if you're right for the part, submit yourself for it.
And they should consider you.
Yeah, don't assume. Like, so for example, you might get a casting, not you, although maybe if they wanted to do like a gender blind version, but like if it says Goldilocks, and if they're doing Goldilocks and the Three Bears, appearance, ethnicity, any, and you're like, well, Goldilocks is blonde, so obviously they're going to choose a white person. They've said any, so submit yourself. Don't make assumptions that the panel aren't going to be open-minded. You have no control whether they're going to be like, yeah, we said any to seem like we're inclusive, but we're going to choose like a white blonde girl. You know, that's not your concern. Actually, before I move on, Josh, do you have anything to add?
Not particularly, because this is very much where I'm on the other side of this conversation. So I'm the one who makes the decisions around gender and cast and colour when it comes to casting, broadly speaking. Now, I have been pushed in the past myself to consciously cast people who aren't white in shows, and that has been an important learning curve, even for me as a director. And to be honest with you, there is a thing with a lot of directors and a lot of casting directors and a lot of people in general where it's very easy to fall into certain white biases, I think.
I think even when you're a person of colour, because we live in a predominantly white society where that has been the default for so long.
And where predominantly white talent is pushed as well. So it's very easy to get a sense of what the perfect performance is, because in most of our ways of consuming theatre and film and TV, the perfect performances, the best performances are lauded from being from predominantly white actors. So it's then saying, well, if you want to emulate or ape that, that's the sort of thing we're looking for in other actors, rather than going, what makes this actor special, or what does this person bring to the table?
Yeah.
That's not 100% the case with everything, and I am aware of that, but it's very easy to fall into that mindset when you are casting something, and it's a very easy trap and a very easy place to get comfortable in as well. So that's something which people from my side of things have to change as well, which unfortunately means that actors have to wait for us to change how we do our things, rather than just being able to go, right, that's a way of doing it, but it doesn't have to be the only way we do it.
That's something that I've noticed as well, is when, especially when you see rehearsal pictures and stuff of shows where I'm like, oh, that looks, you know, the kind of rehearsal pictures from the kind of rehearsal rooms I want to be in as an actor, it's a certain look that is very like, not all the time, but oftentimes it's a look that's very middle class white thespian, which I'm not. In terms,
Anglo-Saxon.
yeah, with like the straight tousled hair, very pale, like baggy jumpers that look like cashmere, and it's, do you know what I mean? Like it's very easy to feel like, oh, that's not a place for me, because that's not what we're seeing reflected back. And I think it's just not letting that stop you from putting yourself out there or asking to be submitted if you have an agent, just because it, like, when I see rehearsal rooms from this kind of play or from this kind of theatre, like, people don't look like me. I don't think any theatre makers at the moment want to be exclusionary. I think what we're battling against is unconscious bias, and that's either manifesting as kind of the tokenism or the massive specificity, or colourblind casting that isn't thought through.
I also think it's worth remembering that one of the reasons that tokenism is such a problem at the moment is less to do with there being more talent that isn't white. I think the biggest problem with tokenism is it's coming from a place of the sector we're in still has a lot of people who are well over the age of 60 making very big decisions. And they only have to make a very small number of decisions, but they have knock-on effects that can last for years. So Hamilton, for example, the decision to make that a colourblind and potentially genderblind in some cases casting process means that it will be accessible. But when you look at some shows and the kinds of shows that you see that go into the West End or go into Broadway or that get large profiles, they still tend to fall into the category of you're going to have a predominantly white cast. Anything Goes that's coming up fairly soon is a fantastic example of this, where it is a predominantly white cast, and it's very easy to excuse it because they go, oh well, that's just the talent we had available, that's just the kind of people that turned up, and it's an easy excuse to make, but it doesn't mean that that's the reason they should have done it.
And I think it's also like Anything Goes is more diverse than it would have been a few years ago.
But it's still not that diverse.
No. But what I'm saying is that's seen as progress when it's like, I think a lot of producers, especially because they're the ones who are all about the money, that's not a bad thing, by the way. That's a producer's job. But it's a risk. In the same way that Black Panther as a film was a risk, because it's like all black film, Marvel film, will people come and see it? You know, having colourblind casting is a risk. And again, deeper diving into it would be a completely separate video, but we mentioned briefly about Legally Blonde at Regent's Park. They've cast a black Elle. That is a risk, because there's going to be loads of people who are like, but Elle's a white woman from Beverly Hills. What are you doing? It's a risk, and some people are going to push back against it. And when your job is to make sure the thing is profitable, you want to toe that line. So it's not going to happen overnight. Yeah, I think that's all I've got to say on that. Any comments from you? Or?
I mean, I was going to say, you mentioned about how you can often enter an audition panel and they're all white, and you told that story of your friend basically being told that she didn't look Nigerian enough and light-skinned, and I know that there are many mixed-race people who are also light-skinned, but also don't feel right only presenting themselves as white. White
There's also a class angle as well, and this is one of the really thorny things about how class is perceived in theatre casting. We are all well-spoken, we are all educated, we are from, in some respects, quite privileged backgrounds, in a manner of speaking. Not completely, but in a manner of speaking. Now that doesn't fit with a certain narrative when it comes to mixed race people, which can be...
Or black people.
Or black people. And that's one of the very frustrating things for us, because we go, well actually it turns out that we don't act or look a certain way. We don't have certain attributes that are very popular to put in certain television shows and in certain theatre pieces. And the biggest problem with that, and this is just me more than anything else, so I can't say this is going to affect you particularly, but it is something which is worth mentioning, is that when you then turn around and say, by the way guys, just because someone isn't white doesn't mean that they are going to fit into this very narrow view that could be lifted off the front page of the Daily Mail or BBC News or The Times to fit a narrative of white superiority. That doesn't fit all of us.
It's like with anything, when white people are looking at a group of people through their lens, it becomes like, this is how we perceive you. It's one of the things that I loved about Half Breed, is that it's set in like Devon, or it's set in the West Country, and she talks about the fact that like she's living in this small village, but like if you were to look at most depictions of black or mixed race people, we all live in cities. I didn't grow up in London. I didn't grow up in a city.
Exactly.
And I'm sure with other kind of racial groups like South Asian or East Asian or Southeast Asian, there are other stereotypes as well. It's frustrating as an actor or a creative when you're being put into a box of how white people think you should be, rather than just being like, here I am I right for this part? And I guess part of the frustration is, what are you being, like, you're not what we expect you to be, so where do we put you? But also, are parts being written that show the multifaceted reality of the mixed race, and specifically Black Caribbean mixed race experience? Exactly. And I think...
And geographically where they are in the world, because the Black Caribbean mixed race experience in London may not be the same as the one in Sheffield, for example, or the same as the one in Edinburgh, or the one in Bristol.
Or the one in Kent.
Exactly.
Or the one in the Caribbean. If there are white mixed race I mean, there's a white population in the Caribbean as well as a black population, so you know, their experience is going to be different as well. And I think that's where systemic change needs to happen in terms of the casting panels. I think the important thing to remember is...
I'm reading far too much of this problem.
I think the important thing to remember, like I said before, is that you can always say no. Like, I had a situation with an audition where it was completely by accident, but there was some stuff that were really icky, and part of that was to do with the fact that it was that token casting thing of, you know, they'd made this character not white because they needed someone not white, but the implications in terms of the rest of the script was like, this is a very damaging stereotype you've now created about this character because they're not white. I mean, it was damaging anyway, just for women.
It was bad.
It was damaging anyway for women, but add the race on top of that, and it's like, no.
It's like, what are you trying to say with this script, really, guys?
If it hadn't been a quick turnaround on the audition and I'd had a chance to read the script before, I probably would have said to my agent, I don't particularly want to be seen for this. As it stood, I couldn't. It was too quick of a turnaround, so I couldn't be like, no. So I went to the audition and did my best, but I've spoken about this story before, sorry. Cameron hasn't heard it.
No,
yeah, so it was a quick turnaround, so I went to the audition because you don't want to just not turn up.
I mean, you weren't sure about this one on principle.
No, I
anyway.
wasn't sure. That's why I said if I'd had more time, I probably would have been like, can you come up with an excuse for me to not go?
Yeah.
Sweetie, can you wait, because it's going to ping. But I told my agent straight away my concerns, and my agent, again, luckily had my back. That's how you know you have a good agent. If you've seen my agent video, you'll know this. In an audition room, then... Not saying you have to burn that bridge and like drag them on Twitter, but you know, maybe they're people that you wouldn't want to work with. Maybe that's a company you wouldn't want to work with. That's the important thing about your own self-care and knowing what your boundaries are, and that's going to be different for everyone. Your boundaries might change the more you're in the industry, or you might be in a position where it's like, this is going to be shitty, but I need this job for the money or whatever. But again, it's about making an informed decision of being like, okay, I know this is not going to be the best in terms of representation. I'm going to put systems in place to look after myself, but I need this job right now, so let's just do it, and you know, it's only for X number of months and then it will be done. Final point, when it is more of that like token casting, the fact that it's more than likely you're going to be the only person of colour in that cast. So
that's a very big factor.
And you know, depending on the sometimes that can be fine. Like sometimes that's not an issue because race doesn't come up, or it's like a contemporary thing and so no one thinks about it. But especially if it's something that's more period or something like that, where people tend to think that we didn't exist before the 1950s in Britain, but you know, you might just happen to have some bigoted actors in your company who you can tell they're like, you shouldn't be here because you wouldn't have been here, when it's like, actually we could have been here, it's just we're never represented in the, our stories aren't told.
Does anyone remember, this is a really old story, but I think just Gordon Brown, some woman asked him something about immigration and he said, who is that bigoted woman, and his microphone was still on, and he had to apologise to this woman for calling her a bigot. I mean, that should have set us up for everything, really, shouldn't it?
Just to close on our point, yeah, I think it's just knowing, in terms of coping with that, is knowing your boundaries, not putting yourself into a box, finding an agent who won't put you into a box. Yeah, just prepare yourself.
Because it probably won't be the last time I experience that.
Yeah, it won't be the last time. Although having said that, you're not going to get I've never had feedback on my song choices in an audition. It would just be like a thank you next. So
like if I'm going for a role, that is.
When you find good people in through like jobs or whatever, like keep in touch with them.
Make friends, don't lose people.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy to lose touch with people and it's very hard to get back into contact with them. More tea, Vicar?
Yes, please.